close to nowhere. I'm born to ramble, I'm born to run, and I can't make sense of the time, and it's hands shaking but they don't feel my mind, and it's voices ringing in my head all the time, saying help me up, just help me on up. No, I can't make sense of the time, and it's hands shaking but they don't feel my mind, and it's voices ringing in my head all the time, saying help me up, just help me on up.
100 years ago, when the Democratic National Convention met in Denver, Colorado, the African American community of Denver petitioned the Democratic Party to include a civil rights plank. The Democratic Party said no. Then they went to William Jennings Bryan and they said, please, simply give us the respect of a plank that denounces lynching. And William Jennings Bryan said, we cannot afford to lose the Solid South, so we will not even give the African American community that. 100 years later, tonight, the Democratic Party that refused even to denounce lynching in Denver in 1908 will, in 2008, nominate an African American man for President of the United States.
Let me raise several basic points I think that we must deal with in the context of this day, because we do now have allies in high places. It may change some strategies of our struggle, but not the character of our struggle, because the basic challenges remain. This is to say that there will be forever, no matter how progressive the president is, a role for activism, a role for conscience, a role for challenge. It is said in the 1940s that A. Philip Randolph and Mary McLeod Bethune, a group of civil rights leaders and labor leaders, met with Franklin D. Roosevelt. He granted the meeting and said to him, we need these things: jobs in the defense industry, we need better wages. They ran on a list of needs that they had, and they were waiting for some objection from Roosevelt. Roosevelt said, I agree with everything you said. Now go out and make me do it.
We know that the strength of this country lies in the way it countenances dissent. And we are here to dissent. We are not deterred by reports of sleek new detention facilities or recently acquired taser guns that kill. For we come to dissent in peace. Indeed, we dissent for peace.
Tell me what you're fighting for. Stop the project, stop the war. Are you fighting for Bush? No. Are you fighting for Cheney? No. Are you fighting for Obama? No. Are you fighting for McCain? No. Tell me what. Fight the power! Fight the power!
The struggle is what makes change. Not a president, not Congress. They're voting for every war budget. And whoever wins, Obama or McCain, they're both preparing for war against Iran, a continued occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan, and only the people can stop the war.
This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy sounds like. This is what democracy sounds like.
We're here because we're fighting for democracy and an end to the war in Iraq. And we will not be silenced, we will not be intimidated, we will not bow or scrape before an administration that has lost sight of our constitutional rights of freedoms of speech and assembly. This is a very brave march today. We marched to the Pepsi Center. All month they said we couldn't go to the Pepsi Center, but we have gone to the Pepsi Center, and this is only the beginning.
We are here protesting against this abomination against the Constitution that they're calling a public viewing area and we're calling the Freedom Cage. You saw when we came here that they routed us through the campus so that there was no possible way that anybody at the Pepsi Center could be aware that there are demonstrators out here. We get to this cage, you see that there's this huge media tent in front of this cage, which is already 700 feet away from the Pepsi Center. So again, there's no possible way that the delegates can be aware that we are here. It's really sad what it's come to in terms of civil liberties in this country.
So what do you think about the placement of the Freedom Cage there, Ron?
I think it's an outrage. It's an insult to our democracy. We are men and women of freedom in this country. You know, you talk about the Beijing Olympics and silencing dissent in Tiananmen Square. Well, they better not try to silence us here in America, because we are going to raise our voices. We're going to march. You're not going to create cages and tell us to protest in. I did not sacrifice 3/4 of my body in Vietnam to end up in some kind of a cage and be told that that was democracy. That's not freedom. That's not democracy.
You'll notice that we're all wearing red inverted triangles. These are a symbol that were used by the Nazi regime to designate political prisoners, and that we feel that's what we are. We are political prisoners, being caged, being denied our constitutional right to present our grievances to the delegates and to our elected officials.
My name's Haroon, and I don't know how many reasons why I'm out here. But one, Democrats are exactly the same as Republicans, and yet everybody's so stoked for Obama, and it's pretty ridiculous. And that policies are going to continue exactly the same, pretty much unchanged. And we're out here resisting that. We're out here showing people that we actually do stand in numbers, that we're going to come out and let them know that. I mean, me myself, I'm Afghan. So, I mean, this is fucking ridiculous. We've lost a lot of people already. I've lost a lot of family members through assassinations. And it's all because of occupation. I mean, under an occupation, they should at least be taking care of the people. They're still starving to death. They're still dying of thirst. There's no economy whatsoever. There's not one positive thing that's been going on right now. And the last 8 years are fucked up, and I think the next 4 are probably going to be the same.
You're not a motherfucking communist! This is your country too! It's our just because you have that fucking bag! Why aren't you with us? What's wrong? You break my heart! You break my heart! You break my heart! This is what happens in a Nazi country, not what happens in America. You can't even walk down the street without them coming out with their war gear on. It breaks my heart. Americans against Americans in our own streets.
From my understanding, the police were fairly frustrated that the night before we had gotten away in an extremely peaceful demonstration. I think there were 2 arrests that day. So last night we actually, as organizers, had word that the police were going to be making mass arrests because they were frustrated with the fact that they had made little or no arrests the day before.
On Monday night we had a mass arrest where the Denver police penned in about 300 individuals, and many of those individuals were just walking by or were standing on the sidewalk watching the march. Some of them were walking to work. They penned in 300 people. They tear gassed some of those people, including some of our legal observers, and those were individuals who we had trained, and they wore the green hats and were just there to observe what was going on. They penned in those people, and after several hours of detainment, they arrested about 100 of them. And it seemed to be fairly indiscriminate. They just picked 100 out of the 300 and took them to the temporary processing center, also known as Gitmo on the Platte. That's the special facility that the police and the city set up specifically to deal with protesters, people that were locked in by the police or were observing from the outside. We were able to dispatch a team of attorneys to go try to visit these protesters at the temporary facility at Gitmo on the Platte. They were denied admittance to see the clients, so that was very frustrating for us. We felt these individuals had the right to consult with lawyers, and instead they were held in these cells for anywhere from several to 20 hours. Then we got the word that they actually, many of them were being pushed through the court system in these sort of midnight hearings, starting about 1 a.m. until 9 a.m. And fortunately, a group of our lawyers, including myself, we were able to get down there at the courthouse at 1 a.m. demanding to see the protesters that were arrested, and we were able to consult with them, let them know their rights, let them know they had a right to plead not guilty, and many of them subsequently did so. And it's very atypical for individuals to be forced to go to court and potentially take an offer, a plea offer, right, in the middle of the night. We think that was an intentional tactic by the city to try to force people to plead guilty without consulting with a lawyer. We plan on fighting these cases to the fullest extent. We still have tens and tens of hours of videotape of this incident to review, and we plan on getting on top of that, not only for the criminal defense, but I think it's quite possible there will be a civil suit against the city around the mass arrest. You know, this was a mass violation of individuals' rights, and they deserve to you know, have some compensation and have their sort of views justified.
I was out in the streets part of the day today, and I spent a lot of time with one of my oldest friends who's been a lawyer in Denver for a very long time. And he had said to me last night that he'd never seen tension surrounding the police department in the whole time he's been here in Denver. I don't think that they understand that they are part of a process of manipulation that has been going on at least since Seattle, if not previous centuries. They have all these new weapons. They get the new weapons plus overtime only because there's a fear of some kind of horrible anarchist attack or terrorist attack or something will happen. And they go on that 1% doctrine of, well, what if there's 1% chance? I was talking to one fellow with a brand new gun that fires a very powerful pellet. I said, you know, I don't think anything is going to happen that you can't handle in a town that hosts the Broncos every week. So, and he said, well, you don't know what happened at the last two conventions. Of course, he didn't know who I was, and I said, well, actually, I was there, and I remember very little happening compared to what the police and the FBI said was going to happen. But in his mind, he thinks these things did happen. He's absolutely convinced, and he's programmed, and there are thousands of these stories being circulated in the homes across the city that there's a stockpile of weapons out there that justifies this huge buildup.
Over the last 6 years, because of the FISA laws, because of the unwarranted wiretapping, invasions of privacy, undercover agents, surveillance of everyday American citizens who simply want to question authority, this country is becoming more and more of a police state. We're not going to stand for that.
Too much law and order is what causes disorder. And we have to be extremely concerned. It's part of something that's been going on, and it's about provoking a greater fear in the public in order to support law and order politics, and it's subsidized by funding that the Republicans can't find a way to generate any other way, but $50 million from Homeland Security is not a bad donation to the Denver Police Department.
We have an issue here. That issue is called immigration. Nobody has had the courage to act on it, and we're politely demanding that you do that. We want to work with you in our communities to craft the legislation that is needed to provide pathways for citizenship and humane treatment of a group of people who are a functional part of this economy.
Yes, we can change the hateful rhetoric against immigrants in our midst. Yes, we can pass comprehensive immigration legislation that provides an earned path of citizenship. Yes, we can change the hearts of even the most rigid members of Congress around the need, the imperative for immigration reform legislation. We will work with you, those of us that are in Washington, but it's you that are marching here in Colorado and in every hamlet and corner of this country that are ultimately going to change the course of this debate.
You know, when we do things like this, it is a very sacred time because we are walking on the ground where our ancestors toiled, but also many of them died. And we are also remembering this march today in the honor of those who died crossing from Mexico into this country.
It's really sad how this country discounts our people. Like, we are treated like cattle, not as people. We're treated like we're subhuman. They tell us that we're a minority when we're really the majority of this continent. We are the founders of this continent. Our ancestors, our antepasados, were the indigenous of this land.
With Backbone Campaign, with the Procession for the Future, promoting a progressive agenda, and it's stating what we need to move away from a war economy to a peace economy, an economy that supports human rights and jobs with justice, health care for all, and housing for all. And beyond just what you see on the streets, the Backbone has a whole entire platform, and each of the issues that are on our banners represent a platform area where the actual proposals are fleshed out.
47 million Americans without health insurance. 9 million of these are children. 47 million. It's more than the population of 24 states combined. 47 million, and 9 million of those are children. For the richest nation in the history of civilization to have more than 30 million children living in poverty and 9 million of them without health care protection, my friends, that is wrong. It is a sin and a shame.
And as a registered nurse, I see firsthand the insults that happen when an individual does not have health insurance. I see patients that divide their pills because they can't afford to take them all the way they're prescribed. I see patients who share their medications with their loved ones because they can't afford them. I see patients who incur huge medical bills and then their homes go into foreclosure. As a registered nurse, I think I have a responsibility to step up and stand out and speak out to say that we need to change our healthcare system. We need to change it, and we have a window of opportunity to do it right now. So healthcare workers from around the country, nurses, doctors, nursing assistants, home care workers, we're all getting together to say we want our broken healthcare system fixed now.
You all should see the November elections as the first step, because history will not be made by electing a savior or a hero or a shero or smart people. History will only be made the only way history has ever been made in this country, when ordinary people get in motion. So we have to create a movement for high quality, affordable health care in this country. We believe in our principles that a strong public plan as an alternative to the private insurance industry should be an option. But whether you're for single payer or whether you're for health care for all, but let's all fight the same enemy right now. Let's fight these insurance companies. Let's win the political battle for health care, and then we'll fight together to win the policy battle that's best for all of us.
So whatever goes on down in the arenas in Vesco Field tomorrow, we hope that it's just a forward look that in positivity that it's got to be better than the last 8 years, where the haves have just run rampant over the have-nots, and the have-nots have been increasing. So let's be able to balance this out and spread love like Bob Marley said.
My name is Kathy Smith. I have a son, Thomas Young, who was paralyzed in Iraq in '04. And I also have a son that's in Iraq right now. 4 years ago, my son was sent out on a mission in an LMTV, an uncovered 2.5-ton truck with no tarp or anything. It was part of Donald Rumsfeld's war that we took over there, the army that we had instead of the army that we wanted. And they went through Solder City on the day that they closed the newspaper, and they had all the riots, and he was shot by a sniper and was paralyzed. After he got out of Walter Reed, I was looking for a support group of military families or wounded soldiers, and I found MFSO, which is Military Families Speak Out. And through Military Families Speak Out, I found IVAW, Iraq Veterans Against the War, and that's how Thomas got involved in IVAW and realized that he had a very powerful voice now that he'd been wounded and people would listen to him.
My son has been to Iraq from September '03 to September '04. He was a combat medic in Ramadi and Fallujah, and came back to find that, well, he's obviously a very different person now than he ever was. And the military has not only refused to help them, but they don't have the capacity to help them. He was diagnosed twice in the military by military doctors as having post-traumatic stress disorder. They gave him all kinds of medication, sleep medication, the whole nine, but when he goes to get out, there's nothing on his paperwork saying that he has post-traumatic stress disorder. So he's getting cheated out of a whole lot of his pay. So now we have to take that post-traumatic stress disorder person and stick them in the front line of the next fight, which is the system, to get what he has coming to him. So when I see the yellow ribbons on cars that say support our troops, I really want to know 5-6 years later how people are really supporting our troops. It just is criminal that they're taking our kids to an illegal, immoral occupation to suppress people who have done nothing and were never a threat, and we know that, and they continue to do it.
Before I joined the military, I was actually fairly conservative, and then when we actually got to Iraq, it was devastation. I mean, just seeing the things and seeing the people that we were hurting, the lives we were destroying, taking husbands, fathers, sons to prison for almost nothing. I mean, it was destroying their economy and making enemies every day. And that's really what turned me off about it. It was the devastation that we were putting on the Iraqi people.
I am standing inside right now a full-size replica of a cell at Guantanamo Bay. And this is a cell that detainees spend 22 to 23 hours a day in. It's 6 feet wide, it's 8 feet tall, and it's about 10 feet from the front to the back. The U.S. military controls the entire experience of the detainees. The lights could be on or off for days or hours at a time. The temperature at Guantanamo is regularly 92 to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, and the U.S. military can choose whether or not to send any kind of air inside the cell. Right now, there are more than 270 people in Guantanamo, and they have not been charged. They've been there for 6 years, and the U.S. government has not been able to tell not only the American people, but the detainees why they've been held for 6 years without charge. Amnesty International is calling for the closure of Guantanamo. We want these detainees put through a fair trial.
We're in Denver to protest an illegal war we were lied into. Today, I'm back. I stand here with the Iraq Veterans Against the War, with my comrades Rage Against the Machine. And I say right now, in a spirit of peace, it's time to to the Democratic Party or Senator Obama.
Representatives from Obama's campaign have agreed to meet with one of our members. Who is our agreed upon spokesman? Who's our spokesman?
The government we have treats our veterans when they get back like dirt. The government we have ignores our Bill of Rights, has gutted our Constitution, makes war all over the planet for oil. Next is the water wars.
And change doesn't happen unless we do it, right? You look at the woman's right to choose, right? That came under a Republican administration, but people were organizing to win it. Right? You look at the civil rights movement and the gains that were achieved from that, people organizing to win it, right? So all of that means that it's not going to change just for us, just because we might have a chance to have something different in office, right? It's all about putting that pressure on, regardless of what we're doing on election day.
This movement is becoming more than a peace movement. It's becoming a democracy movement. We're fighting now for our own democracy here in America. How ironic. But we will keep fighting and struggling until we ensure every American's right to express themselves freely without being intimidated. These people will not silence us. We are Americans. We know our Constitution, and they will not badger us to silence us. We're going to continue speaking until the truth is heard in this country.
Let me raise several basic points I think that we must deal with in the context of this day, because we do now have allies in high places. It may change some strategies of our struggle, but not the character of our.
100 years ago, when the Democratic National Convention met in Denver, Colorado, the African American community of Denver petitioned the Democratic Party to include a civil rights plank. The Democratic Party said no. Then they went to William Jennings Bryan and they said, please, simply give us the respect of a plank that denounces lynching. And William Jennings Bryan said, we cannot afford to lose the Solid South, so we will not even give the African American community that. 100 years later, tonight, the Democratic Party that refused even to denounce lynching in Denver in 1908 will, in 2008, nominate an African-American man for President of the United States.
So close to nowhere, I'm born to ramble, I'm born to run, and I can't make sense of the time, and it's hands shaking but they don't feel my mind, and it's voices ringing in my head all the time, saying help me up, just help me on up. No, I can't make sense of the time, and it's hands shaking but they don't feel my mind, and it's voices